Hello, everybody. Welcome to VidCon now. I am so happy to be here with my special guest, Mark Manson. We are going to be talking today for about 30 minutes, and I'd like to introduce myself, and then I'll let Mark introduce himself. My name is Matt Dajer. I am the co-founder of a YouTube channel called Yes Theory, where my friends and I go around the world when usually we're able to travel, seeking discomfort, getting out of our comfort zones, and finding strangers along the way to join us. Today, I'm going to be talking with Mark Manson, who has been such a huge influence in my life, such a huge inspiration, and I've been reading his work for years now, and I've been lucky enough to get to know him, and I am so stoked to have him. But Mark, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. I'm Mark Manson. I have much more hair now than I did in the splash footage. I feel like, you know how like baseball players refuse to shave until the end of the playoffs. I feel like I'm not going to get a haircut until COVID-19's over. So we're just going to see where this goes. But I am best known for writing The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F***. Also wrote Everything's the book about hope. But I guess primarily the reason I'm here is I'm an old school, feels weird to say that, but I guess these days in internet years, I'm a weathered veteran of the content game. I started blogging in 2007. I've been blogging full-time professionally since 2010. My blog is markmanson.net, has millions of readers each month. And I just in the last year or so, I've been venturing into video content. So it's a pleasure to be here in VidCon. It's a pleasure to be hanging out with you again, Matt. When they asked me if I knew any prominent YouTuber to do this with, I'm like, you were like the first person that came to mind. So
Prominent. Thank you.
So it's cool to be here, and it'll be fun to catch up and get into some things.
For sure. Well, I think there's the obvious elephant in the room that we have to address first and foremost, which is how have you, for a person who tends, I mean, you're on the side of things where you give advice, like people look to you as an expert, as somebody that that's has this idea of what a good lifestyle looks like. When something like this happens, like the things that have happened this year, how has that shifted the advice that you've given? How has it shifted like how you've seen the work that you've done before versus now, and like how you're approaching your communication to your audience?
In terms of the advice itself, nothing's really changed. And I guess that's actually good news, right? Like it's easy to give people advice when times are good, but when things go wrong, you suddenly look at that advice and you're like, well, I shouldn't have said that. Then that's probably a problem. So I'm happy to report that there's not really anything that hasn't stood up to the stress test of what we're going through now. And in fact, it's been interesting because like my platform, I'm getting more traffic than I have in probably 5 or 6 years. And I think it's just because people are struggling and are looking for something to help them. But in terms of how I interact with my audience, that has actually changed quite a bit because people are home all the time. People are online all the time. People are much more, I typically, in years past, I kind of avoid current events. I avoid talking about political stuff. But there have been so many moments this year where things that are so big and important have happened that it feels kind of impossible not to talk about it. And so it's actually been, in terms of just how to stay in touch and stay involved with the audience, but not, walk that kind of fine line between being pretentious and being thoughtful. That's actually been very difficult this year.
Mm-hmm. And when you say the advice hasn't changed, are there certain things in particular that you look at that are really relevant today?
Well, I think I was very fortunate in that I built an entire brand around the importance of struggle. So much of my writing is about how, life is going to throw you curveballs, and there are going to be a lot of things outside of your control that are going to mess things up for you. Um, and it's all about how the mindsets that you have, that you approach that with. So in that sense, it's really just reaffirmed a lot of the stuff that I've been writing about for years. And a lot of people have been getting a lot out of it. And I've been getting a lot of great emails from people. It's kind of the day-to-day stuff that's very difficult and weird.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't, how I imagine for you guys, because so much of you guys' content is based around travel and adventure, being adventurous and spontaneous
Mm-hmm.
and things like this is like the least spontaneous environment that I can possibly imagine for you guys. So I
Yeah.
mean, I'm curious how you guys are dealing with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously a lot of people have had it way worse than us. Like we're still very fortunate to have jobs and to get to work together. For us, though, our whole motto is seek discomfort, but we rarely are thrown the discomfort as much as we seek it. This has been a huge learning lesson in the fact that sometimes you don't actually need to seek it, that it just, it'll just constantly come your way. And what's ended up happening is we spent so much time away and so much time helping strangers get out of their comfort zones and doing all this crazy stuff, that having a second to pause and to reflect and to go internally was actually the most uncomfortable thing we could possibly do. Like there's a lot of stuff we just avoided, in our personal
Interesting.
lives, that we all of a sudden had to come face to face with, and we were like, I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to deal with this. And then you're like, well, no, this is what you preach. So you kind of have to. But it's been really rewarding, and it's brought us closer together. And we're just really excited for the next chapter. How about you? Well, I know that you initially, you talked about how you struggled during the quarantine and how there were certain things that you started to implement. You called the god of a routine.
Core routines. Yeah.
Core routine. Yeah.
um, yeah, I the first few weeks were pretty rough. I spent most of 2018 and 2019 just on the go constantly. I had 2 book releases. I'm doing I'm co-authoring Will Smith's book with him. So I was jumping on jets around the world with him. Like my 2018, 2019 were just crazy. I was never home. I was always taking meetings, flying out somewhere, doing something interesting. And then suddenly I'm just like here, it's like everything's stopped, everything's canceled, whole calendar gets cleared. And I think it, kind of similar to what you said, it just, it forces you to sit and get perspective on your own life, especially in some ways which maybe you were avoiding getting perspective on. And it was emotionally difficult for a few weeks there. And I found, kind of the conclusion I came to was, first of all, doing a bunch of research into, people like, say, military people and astronauts, and also like scientific studies of people who are in isolation for long periods of time. Like pretty much every single conclusion, everywhere I looked, everybody said, find a routine and stick to it. Like the way you kind of survive isolation and solitude is you just become religious about your routine. And so that, once I kind of got that locked down, things got a lot better. And then the other thing I've really discovered is that my mental well-being seems to be pretty proportional to how many goals or pursuits I have that I'm working on. I find that like when I'm not pursuing something, whether it's a work project or a personal goal or whatever, that's when the chaos of the outside world starts weighing on me. And that's when I start getting really bummed out about what's going on. But like, if I've got like a health goal I'm working on, and a project in my business that's awesome and exciting, and my wife and I, even stupid stuff, like my wife and I like did this massive puzzle together. Like it's just like having something to look forward to every day of like, oh yeah, I can't wait to like make progress on that. When I have things like that,
Mhm.
it makes all of this much, much easier for me.
Definitely. Do you feel like you're posting so much, like the Monday newsletters, the YouTube content, just like on your website as well? Like, do you feel like there's been a greater connection with your community since all this started to happen? Like, you mentioned in the most recent newsletter that you're getting a lot more emails than you used to because people are just engaged with it more. Um, is it have you started to talk to your community more than you used to? Do you feel like?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one is I'm just around more. Um,
Hmm.
and so there's just more, I have more time to create content. Um, but it's funny because, one of my goals in 2020 was to do more content, like start being more consistent with content anyway. And then the pandemic happened. And so now it's like, I have no excuse, but it's interesting because I think I mentioned before that traffic has been up quite a bit since this started. Engagement's been up quite a bit as well. I just noticed that um, people people are more engaged, but also people are more. I'm trying to think of the right word that like doesn't sound demeaning, but like sensitive, or like people are more raw, right? So
Mm,
we all, everybody who puts their stuff online, like you get angry comments and angry email, you get haters, right? um what surprised me is just how sensitive I think people's nerves are very raw right now. So um there's a lot more angry emails or comments than before, but they're not, usually it's just like some idiot being an asshole. Like now it's actually like people who are like, well, my aunt is sick and my uncle lost his job and you said this. And I'm like, whoa,
mm,
whoa, whoa. Like I didn't
mm.
time out. Like I didn't
Yeah,
like I didn't mean it that way. Like
right.
let's relax for a second, and then the person replies and they're like, I'm sorry, I was just really upset yesterday.
Yeah,
So there's a lot of that kind of thing going on where it's just like people are just very, very wound up right now. And I really think a lot of kind of the social media craziness that we've been seeing the last few months and the protests that we saw last month and all that, like I think there's some element of that is spilling over into these other things in the world of people just being so emotionally um, raw from sitting at home for 4 months.
yeah, for sure. I mean, for us on our end, I mean, I respect you for being able to put out so much content, but we we kind of like took a huge pause. We kind of stepped away from filming any videos for about like 4 to 5 months, essentially since the pandemic started, because we were very sensitive to like even like our whole thing is going out and meeting strangers. So obviously we couldn't go out and talk to anybody, but it was also like uh, we just we didn't feel like we knew what to communicate to people because we didn't know ourselves, like we didn't know what was going on, so we just kind of stayed a little silent, which looking back we've talked about this where we wish we had been a little more vocal and said more
Mm-hmm.
and been there for people, because I think especially now in the age of like digital, as content creators there's this almost this responsibility to be a leader, as a responsibility to be there for people. Like it's very, like you said, it's easy in the good times to say all these fun things, go to all these fun places and do all this crazy stuff. But when shit hits the fan and you disappear, it's like, where were you? What are you doing?
Yeah.
So it was a huge learning lesson for us in terms of like going forward, how much we want to communicate to our audience, because they really look to us
Yeah.
to find answers.
It's hard. I think some of that is smart because I know so much of you guys' content, especially the stuff I imagine you had stuff recorded months before this all started that hadn't
Hmm.
gone live yet. Like that, I think part of what makes this so hard is that during difficult times, there's a lot of content that doesn't feel appropriate. So like I remember I wrote an email. I usually write my newsletters go out on Monday and I usually write them on Friday. And for some reason this week like a month or two ago I wrote my newsletter on like Wednesday, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna make this like a really positive upbeat newsletter. There's so much like bad stuff happening in the world, like I'm gonna like I'm going to write a newsletter about like why life, reminding people why life is great and why you should be thankful for this and that. And I was like really happy about it. I'm like, oh, this is going to make people feel good. And then like 2 days later, the George Floyd protest started.
Oh God.
And then the whole weekend was just like insanity and like everything, like wall to wall coverage on every media network and everything. It's like buildings on fire and like cops like tackling people and stuff. And I'm like, oh shit. Like I've got this newsletter about how great the world is going out, tomorrow.
Oh God.
And so, so I got on Saturday night and like pulled it, and I'm like, I gotta like rewrite something from scratch. And I think the difficulty as a content creator is you have to be much more aware in times like this of how people are feeling, and being sensitive to like the issues going on in people's lives, and making sure that like you don't have a foot in mouth moment, or that something doesn't land quite right with people. And I think in a lot of cases I err on just saying nothing at all, right? Because if you're not sure that you have something good to say, it's better to make no errors than than to just throw something out there and hope it works.
For sure. And do you think that'll continue after all this is over? Like like people's sort of sensitivity towards these, towards your content, or do you feel like people will let more pass, essentially? Like they'll be more forgiving.
I think a lot of it just depends on how things are going. I really think it's just when people feel good, they'll give you a pass on stuff. They're like, oh, I didn't agree with that, or oh, I thought that was a little insensitive, but whatever. Like I've got my life's great, and but it's when everything is in the toilet.
Yeah.
People, and especially when everybody's sitting at home pissed off all day, like you don't want any unforced errors. So I think this is a temporary thing, and that we just have to be very conscious and careful.
Sweet. Well, I don't want to. We'll make it a little more positive from here on out, because we could definitely talk about the struggles with COVID for a long time. But I think you're in a very interesting scenario where you've had so much success as a writer, as a blogger initially, and now as a writer of these several books, that I find it fascinating that now you're exploring the YouTube and Instagram space, that you've achieved all the success, and now it's almost like you're going into this new arena. And I'd love to know how that experience has been for you, what you've learned about being more in the like video content space, and especially on like YouTube and Instagram. So yeah, I'd love to. Being from this world, it's amazing to see you join the squad.
It's fun. I get to be a newbie again. So there's something just fundamentally humbling about that. Every medium, every platform has its own personality. The composition of the audience is a little bit different. The expectations of the audience is a little bit different. And so there's this process of you need to fall flat on your face a few times to start to understand, like, oh, that's what people respond to, or like, oh, that's what like they get excited about. And so for me, that's just kind of fun. I've been blogging and writing for so long. It's been years and years and years since I've kind of had that fall on your face experience. So I'm going through that right now with the video stuff. I'm trying different styles. I'm hiring different people and working with different people. And I think the goal is to kind of find my niche and get comfortable by the end of the year. But in terms of like just why, I just find that, when subtle art took off and became really successful, I had a little bit, it felt like I'd been climbing this mountain for 10 years. And then suddenly in 2017, I'm like standing on top of it. Everything that 25-year-old Mark dreamed and hoped for happened. And I had a little bit of a period of just kind of standing there like, well, why why do anything else? Like, why not just cash checks and, you know, hire 4 or 5 people to just keep repeating the same shit over and over and just keep, keep the paychecks coming. And, it just, that didn't feel good. It didn't feel right. And I discovered that I really, just on a personal level, I really crave challenge. And I also discovered that it's just, there's so many, the online space is evolving so quickly. Blogging it's not dead, but it's like, there's been a ceiling on blogs for the last 5 years. There's not really anywhere further a blog can go than I think where I'm at. And so, just asking myself of like, okay, what would be a fun avenue to reach people who otherwise wouldn't be exposed to my ideas or my work? And to me, it was either YouTube or podcasting. And I dabbled in podcasting, and I was like, this actually is not nearly as fun as I thought it'd be. And but then, when I was promoting my last book, I did so many interviews with YouTubers and hung out with people with shows. People hung out with you, and I was like, this is fun. I could do this. Like, right? Like this is a cool mountain to climb. So that's where I'm at. I'm starting off at base camp, and I'm feeling good about it. I'm excited.
So if you were 25-year-old Mark today, would you go into YouTube first, or would you start like a newsletter? Where do you feel like, for especially like a young writer, where's a good place to be?
If you're a young writer, it's hard right now. The areas that are growing right now is podcast and video, and there's not the period of time we're in at this moment. That's kind of inescapable. I would probably, if I was starting out today, I would probably start a YouTube channel with the goal of turning people on getting people onto a newsletter or getting a book deal out of it. I think YouTube is just where the biggest growth is at the moment. Podcasting's super crowded. And I think it's a bit of a bubble. But I see YouTube, and it's just, there's a frothiness here that, it reminds me of, and I feel so old saying shit like this, but like, it reminds me of Facebook in 2013, 2014. And that's where I like really blew up. Was like, if you were back in 2013, if you were one of the first people that figured out how to like create a clickbait headline, man, like millions of people would come through your site. And I figured that out before most people did. And I grew my audience off the back of that. And so it's just YouTube. It's just there's so many like crazy growth stories happening in this space right now. And things are getting so much better and more professional each year that like, it feels really exciting.
Agreed. I feel like do you think for your YouTube channel, is the goal to get more people to subscribe to the newsletter, or is it just to increase the YouTube following in general? Like, do you ultimately want to sell more books directly to that audience on YouTube, or just convert them to your site?
I'm starting to see, that's a really good question, actually. So back in the day, kind of the strategy was you had your main platform. So in my case, it was a blog, and then you would kind of repurpose content onto all these other platforms. So you'd have your blog, and then you'd post on Facebook and post on Twitter and post on Instagram with the goal of getting people to the blog. I think today it's every platform, it kind of exists in its own bubble. So, when you're on YouTube, you can't just like take blog content and put it on YouTube. Like that worked maybe 5 years ago, but today it doesn't work. Like if you're on YouTube, you have to play the YouTube game. If you're on Instagram, you got to play the Instagram game. And so my goal is to simply build the audience. Wherever I am, my goal is, so when I'm on YouTube, I just want to build a YouTube audience. If they want to sign up for the newsletter, that's great. If they want to buy a book, that's great. But where I am now, I just want to grow the audience. I feel very strongly that like my brand of self-development advice is different and it's new, and I just want to get it in front of as many people's eyeballs as possible. 5 years from now when I have something to sell, maybe I'll sell it, but for now it's just like,
I also feel like your content would be perfect for TikTok. Like just like a 1 minute clip of, short burst advice would be great. I think you would smash that.
Dude, I'm going to sound like such a cranky old man. Like the day I knew I was old was I downloaded TikTok, and it was for the first time in my life, I downloaded a social media app, and I was like, I don't get this. Like, I was like, I don't get that. I don't get why people use this, and I was like, oh no, it's happened. It finally happened.
Cut to 6 months from now and you'll be
like lip syncing a song or whatever.
That's so funny. I mean, I honestly, I felt quite old when I went on TikTok too, where I was like, I mean, we've been in the YouTube game for 5 years now.
Yeah.
And when we were starting on YouTube, even when we were starting, people were saying YouTube is oversaturated. Like, it's too late. You won't be able to get any attention, all this stuff. And I look at some of the creators coming up now and I'm like, wow, it's not even getting started. Like, there's just no audience, in my opinion, like a YouTube audience, because we have a newsletter, we're on all these different platforms, and you say something on YouTube, you ask your audience to do something like click a link or go to a place or whatever, and that kind of engagement is unheard of compared to these other platforms. Like, for example, when this was like 2 years ago, we challenged Will Smith to the helicopter bungee jump that day, and we asked our audience to comment on his most recent video, that Yes Theory has challenged him. And then we looked the next day and 25,000 people had written, there were 25,000 new comments on Will's video. And we hadn't really understood the like how engaged the audience was, but there's like a whole community there that was just waiting to feel engaged. Do you feel like for you, do you notice your own community connecting with each other? Like, are you finding ways to sort of get people to talk, to connect? Because for us, that's been, I think, the most valuable thing, like creating a community Facebook group where people can connect, a Discord where people can connect, and it actually makes their attachment and love for what we do even greater.
Yeah. The community question's a good one. I'm going to be really honest. I've tried it throughout the years, and it's never really worked out. And I think, and here's why, is because the space that I'm in, so much of my work is about, helping people deal with pain and trauma and struggles and loss and breakups and all these things. It's people who come to my content, or who are generally most engaged with my content. It's because they're in some sort of pain. And so what ended up happening is a lot of these people, there have been multiple times through the years where I've created forums or Facebook groups or things like that. People come into these groups and they start posting for help. And inevitably what happens is they start receiving advice from literally the last person on earth who should be giving advice.
Yeah.
And it just becomes this policing process of, now I'm not only am I having to give people advice, but now I'm having to go through and delete all the terrible advice that other people are giving. And so I started to realize that there's actually a little bit of at least in the case of like my space, there's a little bit of like I guess an ethical hazard there. So a community is something I've always wanted to bring people together in some way, but it's just, I haven't quite found the right way to do it without that dynamic playing out of, of the blind leading the blind, so to speak.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I mean, at this point, I just try to, I think that's why I like email so much, is that it's the most intimate way for me to interact with people, so it's like if they want to come to me with some difficult thing that they're dealing with, they can just email it to me, and we don't have to deal with the rest of the world seeing it or weighing in with their opinion.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I agree. Cool, Mark. All right, dude, we're gonna go through a few of the questions that people have maybe. I don't know how much time we have. I think we're almost done. But I'll find a good question that somebody sent us. Um,
We could just blow through these really quick if you want.
yeah, should we hit them?
Yeah,
Cool.
we can just machine gun them.
All
Oh,
right, let's hit
15
them.
minutes. No, we got
Oh, we have
time.
15 minutes. Okay, perfect. Okay, so
Yeah.
question number one. We're struggling to do work during the pandemic. How do we communicate that straight up without annoying our viewers who just want more content? How do we communicate it? Just
Well, I mean, I think you can be honest. It's a little bit of a catch-22, right? So if you've got viewers who just they don't care about you, they just care about content, then they don't care why you're not creating content. But
Mhm.
I do think there is just value in being honest, being like, hey, I'm having a hard time right now. You're not going to see as much from me over the next few months. It's if you just kind of lay it out there, you don't need to like divulge every gory detail or give a sob story or anything. Just be like, hey guys, like this is pretty rough for me at the moment. I won't be around as much as I usually am. I've found that audiences, both my own and other people I know, like if you're just very upfront about like, hey, I need a few months off, I'll see you in September. It's incredible how patient and loyal people are.
Totally agree. I think there's a fear of not being consistent
Yeah.
where your audience will fully disappear. And from our experience, we've left sometimes for like 3 to 4 months, even before COVID, where we just really needed a break from posting. And it was a while to feel the excitement of people when you come back. It's like you've been away traveling for 3 to 4 months and you come back to your family and they're like, oh, it's so good to have you back. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's almost like you almost kind of need to take those breaks because people quickly uh, take it for granted, all
Yes.
the content that you're making.
I think
So
so. I think there's something to be said about creating kind of a sense of scarcity, for a better word. It's like if people, like you said, they take you, like if they see you on their YouTube page every other day, like they just take you for granted. They stop
yeah,
clicking. So it's the distance makes the heart grow fonder, but it's also just good for mental health. Like you don't want to get stuck into that weekly posting grind forever.
yeah, agreed. Perfect. Question number two. How do you empathize with your audience during this time?
I mean, for me, it's just so my primary mode of communication with my audience is via email. And I've intentionally set it up that way. So if you go to my Instagram account, there's an autoresponder telling people to email me. If you go to message me on Facebook, same thing, tells people to email me. On my website, tells people to email me. So I prefer email just because people tend to put the most effort into their emails and it feels the most discreet and personal. So I hear all kinds of screwed up, I mean,
I'm
sad,
sure.
scary, fucked up stuff. And it's you, I mean, it doesn't take many hours in my inbox to to humble yourself a little bit.
Yeah, put things into perspective a little.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And how do you go about answering them, like communicate? Like, do you answer like 5 emails every time, or because it's probably a ton? Like, how do you filter through it?
Yeah, so I have an assistant who filters everything. The instructions are to let anything thoughtful and uh, respectful come through. I mean, there's some other stipulations, but generally, it's whether it's positive or negative, anything that is honest and thoughtful and not being a douchebag will get through. I set aside Sunday afternoon as my time to catch up on reader email. I do business email throughout the week, but I take 3 or 4 hours every Sunday and just
Wow.
knock out 200 or 300 reader emails. I don't respond to everything, but I do try to read everything that
Wow.
gets to me.
Well, that makes me feel terrible because I read through our emails and I have not been good at doing that. So
It's
You
hard,
motivated me.
man.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard. Some weeks I'm like, you know what? Like you just said, right? It's like some weeks it's just like I need a week
Yeah.
off. I can't do this.
Yeah. Because then you also, I sometimes I do feel like a fraud where this person's asking for all this advice and I start answering and I'm like, I haven't even figured this out. Like, how am I supposed to tell this person what to do? I'm just as confused as you right now. So,
Sometimes that's the perfect response though. My
yeah.
favorite response is because sometimes I get these questions that are like hilariously specific, so I'll get an email from like an 18-year-old kid in India who's like, my parents want me to go to med school, but I really like engineering. What should I do? And I'm like, I have no fucking idea, dude. Like,
Yeah.
why are you
Yeah.
asking me?
Yeah.
And like, that's my reply.
Yeah.
It's I what I've found is that a lot of times people just, it's the email, it's like the writing out and sending that's the therapeutic
Hmm.
part of the email. It's the answer is actually not like, my answer is like whatever. It's the
Yeah.
fact that they actually wrote out what's troubling them and sent it to a stranger who read it. Like that's
Yeah.
what they needed.
True that. And sometimes even giving, yeah, the advice may not make it better, just
Yeah.
letting it stay silent and just, yeah, exactly. Having them write it out. Cool. Question number 3 is, how do you tell important stories in your life that involve other people? That can get tricky when discussing more than just yourself. How do you tell important stories in your life?
And I've gotten in trouble with this. Have you gotten in trouble with this before?
Talking about your personal stuff in public?
Or like people, friends, family members, and
My mom, yeah. My mom's like, please stop sharing a lot of our family stuff.
yeah, man. I got in trouble with my brother once because I wrote an article about, I like used him as an example of somebody who like was like really confident about like their life path and their life goals. Like he wanted to go into politics. Um, and that article went viral. It got shared like 500,000 times on Facebook or whatever. And so like
Oh gosh.
a bunch of people at his office read it and like came in. They're
Oh
like, oh
God.
my God, I never knew you wanted to be a senator. And my brother's just like mortified, absolutely mortified. Yeah, I got chewed out. One of the things I use with this is there are a lot of ways to anonymize this, so being very vague, saying like, I once had a friend, like, let's say it's my brother who wants to do X, Y, or Z, instead of saying my brother, I could say a good friend of mine wants to blah, 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 blah. And that way your friends who read it always think it's some other friend, and my brother will think it's another friend.
Yeah.
Parents,
But
it's hard.
yeah, I was gonna say, even in your book in Subtle Art, you talk about your mom, you talk about your family and
Yeah.
how like communication was so difficult. Was there a response from them when that came out, especially considering it went so freaking viral?
um my mom, so the book was fine. I think a lot of it has to do with the message that's attached to it. My parents didn't really get upset about the stuff I put in my book about them. My mom did get upset once when I talked about her in one of my articles, and she was totally right. I used her in an example that I shared some personal information about her that was totally unnecessary. And so I think you have to be careful. I think, when I talk about my parents' divorce in the book, ultimately I'm talking about the divorce because of the effect it had on me. So in that way, it's kind of my story. If I was like saying, hey, my parents got divorced and this is all the things that they fucked up, and like using them as an example, it's like, okay, now I could pick any two people in the world. I don't have to pick
Right.
my parents,
Right.
So I think it's a very delicate thing.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah, I think the good friend technique is the right way to go.
Yeah.
Perfect. Question number 4. Do you think it's important to talk about world events, even if you are mainly creating other educational or fun content?
Dude,
Tough one.
welcome to 2020.
Yeah, I know.
I don't know. It's kind of like what you were saying earlier, Matt. Like, I don't know if there's a right answer to this right now, because if you don't talk about some things, people are going to be very upset that you don't talk about them. But then if you do talk about them, people are going to be upset with whatever you say about them, right? For me, I don't talk about it unless I feel like there's a moral component to it. So I talked a lot about COVID-19 back in February and early March. And I was very explicit. I'm like, guys, I usually don't go on about something like this, but like,
Yeah.
It's the type of thing, I guess my barometer is this something that if I don't talk about it, I'm going to regret it a year from now? And if the answer is yes, with coronavirus, absolutely. I was like, if I don't say something, the rest of my life, I'm going to feel guilty that I didn't say anything. Whereas with a lot of other issues, especially politics, I think it's just better to let it go. Like I try really, really, really hard to not touch politics in any way.
Nice. Yeah, for us, it's been actually almost the opposite. Like we didn't talk too much about COVID because we didn't fully get it. But when it came to Black Lives Matter, like that's when we became vocal again. Just because our whole thing is about, a stranger is just a friend you haven't met yet, that everybody should be treated equally. So I think it's really just the brand you have, if it's something that's relevant to the message that you're constantly preaching, you really need to step in and talk about it. But I know creators who, I mean, like, who like you focus on other things and avoid politics altogether and have just continued making content that they used to and that they believe in. And I think that's also fine. Like it like you speak up if you think like this is something that really means something to you. But it's also, like you said, some people are just like, listen, man, the world's crazy. Like maybe the only thing that they need to hear right now is me making this fun content. And for us, that just wasn't for us. We just felt weird about putting out like we're having such a great time, and outside you look and the world's freaking burning, and you're like, yeah, we can't avoid that. We gotta address this.
I think there's a danger too that I started to fall into in the spring, which is I think if you start talking about current events a little bit too much, that becomes all the feedback you get. So you start hearing from all the people who agree with you and all the people who disagree with you, and you start falling into that false sense that that's what people want from you. And it was funny because I got very caught up in a lot of like kind of current event things back in April and May. And the newsletter open rates like just started dropped like probably 10-20%. And I was like, what am I doing? Like, I'm not a journalist. Like, I'm like the not give a fuck guy. So I went back to what I normally do, my normal content, and immediately the engagement came back. And so I think it's okay to touch on it, but you don't want to live there. Like if that's not your brand, like just don't live there.
Agreed.
Say your piece and move on.
Agreed. Beautiful. Last question. Question number 5. Does having some amount of recognizability change how you create content? And is it helpful, or was it easier before people knew you?
I'm definitely less personal. I mean,
in what way?
But this is going back a long time, like when I think about like 10 years ago when I started blogging, I would be way more personal with like way more specific details. I would talk about the apartment I lived in, like the date I went on with a girl. I would describe the girl. I would describe the day, like it was super detailed. I would never do that sort of thing today. I would never describe where I live. I would never describe if I went on it. I mean, I'm married, but like if I went on a date with somebody, like I would never describe the date or the person. So I think there's a little bit, the higher your profile becomes, I think there's a little, you need to protect yourself with some ambiguity. I think for me, there was I discovered at some point that there needs to be a very strong line between public and personal.
Yeah,
There needs to be things that are just for me, and there need to be friendships and relationships that are just for me, and like the world doesn't get to know about them. But then there's parts of me that I'll share with anybody and I'll talk about with anybody, you know? And so I think getting very clear on where that line is for you is important, you know, if you start to see your audience grow like that.
for sure. And do you feel like on top of it all, has there been a pressure to like meet the content that you like the virality that you've had in the past because it's been so successful? I think you've written about this, like the whole,
Oh yeah, dude.
yeah, the different
Chasing
bands
the
that,
numbers, man.
yeah, seriously.
um, dude, it's like a curse. I'm sure you guys have gone through it too, right? It's like you put something out that gets like 5 million hits, and then the next thing you put out gets 3 million, and you're like, God, why do I suck so much? This is terrible, you know? And it's
Yeah,
just so irrational. It makes no sense. Um, yeah, it's just human nature, and I think it's really, really important to um, like you're never going to detach from the numbers. You're always going to care how many views you get. But like, I think it's really important to kind of zoom out a little bit and see the long-term trajectory. Like, don't live from video to video of like,
yeah,
you know, like, oh man, like this one has 5,000 fewer views than the last one. Like, what the hell? I need to change everything. It's like, no, like, give it time.
yeah. It's tough because I mean, that's the advice I would give as well, but it's very, very difficult to follow. Like when you're in it week to week to week and you're putting so much work into the content, and then, you know, it's like YouTube even has a thing now where they show you out of 10 how the video is doing compared to the last 9 videos. So you see it and like sometimes it'll be like an 8 out of 10. You're like, are you kidding me right now? It, my world is over. My world is over, you know?
Career's over.
Yeah,
Everybody's gonna
everything's over.
unsubscribe.
Yeah. So you're right, like step because we upload on Sundays and we've had in the past this terrible habit of, you know, checking for the first hour just to see how
Yeah.
it'll do. And we just had to stop doing it and instead we would just go on hikes without our phones and be like I
Yeah.
cannot spend the only day I have off on Sunday looking at how that past week of work is doing. So I think for just the sanity of creators, like there needs to be like you need to have strict rules
Yeah.
about how often you're checking, about when you like make time to go away and reflect and take care of yourself. So
Absolutely. I got one more quick thing to say about that,
yeah,
which
please.
is took me years to discover this, but there's you can measure the success of a piece of content in many different dimensions. You know, there are pieces on my website. So there are pieces on my website that have gotten tens of millions of views. There are pieces on my website that have gotten, you know, a tiny fraction of that, but I get more emails about those articles, you know, say an article with only a couple 100,000 views or whatever. I get dozens and dozens of emails about that article. People saying it changed my life. Oh my God, I'll never see things the same again. And so sometimes impact is measured completely. You know, you can't capture
Yeah,
impact in a view count or even a time on video or time on page or whatever. Like there's no way to capture that. There's no way to capture like the metric for lives changed or ideas changed or perspectives changed. And so sometimes there are a lot of pieces on my site that are not particularly popular or they don't get shared a lot, but I see them as they're more for deepening my
yeah.
relationship with the audience rather than broadening the audience. They deepen the relationship with the audience, and so they're
And
still
do you
very
feel like you
valuable.
need that combination of both? You need the deepening and
Absolutely.
also the yeah,
Absolutely,
yeah,
because if you're just chasing views, like you're just a monkey. Like it's a
yeah,
hamster wheel, right? Like it's just it'll never be enough. There's gonna always gonna be some algorithm change or some new trend or fad that you got to jump onto. Like
yeah,
that's when you just get caught on the treadmill. And but if you're able to also create content that goes deep, that people like videos that people remember 2 or 3 years later and go back to, um, you know, that's when you've got a fan for life, you know.
for sure.
Like you could go away for a year and come back and that person's still going to watch your stuff. So it's you need all kinds.
Yeah.
to make it work.
Agreed. Cool. Well, dude, I think we went a little over, but I'm very happy because
It was
that was
fun.
awesome. Yeah. So
Yeah,
I think
man.
I'm supposed to. I think I'm supposed to kick you out now. I think that's
Oh,
how.
all
I
right.
don't know.
Well, thanks, guys. And thanks, dude. It was fun chatting with
Yeah.
you as
Same
always.
here.
And hopefully I'll see you at some point when all this is over.
Let's do it. One day. One day. I'm excited.
All right, man. Take
All
care.
right. Great chatting. You too.
Bye.
Cheers. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for watching and listening. We really appreciate it. And for those of you who sent in the questions, thank you, thank you, thank you. Mark is awesome. You should definitely go check out his website, his books if you haven't already. And just wanted to thank you all again for coming. So enjoy VidCon now, and we'll see you again next time. Much love.